This conference will now be recorded.
And I also need to put in my earbobs here. So if someone just asked a question and I didn't respond, it's because I wasn't listening. Sorry about that. Okay, welcome to this webinar. We're going to discuss multiple offers. First, we're going to go through some information that NAR and North Carolina Association of Realtors has provided. And then we're just going to have an open forum and talk about multiple offers. As I'd mentioned earlier, please mute yourselves and then unmute yourself if you have a question. I've noticed right now we are getting some background noise, so someone please mute yourself. Okay, I think that's better. All right, so let's begin. First thing we're going to do is I want to show you this video produced by NAR on how to handle multiple offers. This is only like a 4-minute video, so let's watch that and then we'll discuss a few things from the video. Okay, so everyone should be able to hear and see that.
You can see but not hear it.
I can't hear it either.
Okay, sorry about that. Let me try unmuting myself. Let me know if you can hear this now. I'm just going to play it. If no one speaks up, I'll assume you can hear it.
Cannot hear it.
Okay, well, that didn't work. I guess we're going to have to try something different. We're just going to skip the video. I'll just tell you a little bit about what was in the video. If anyone might happen to know why this isn't working, okay, I need to get this back down to a small size. Sorry for the hiccups here, folks. Okay, well, basically, this just goes over some of the basics of handling a multiple offer. A couple of the key points that it brings up is you do need permission from your sellers to disclose to buyers if there are multiple offers. So if you get multiple offers, you first need to get permission from your seller to let the buyers involved know that you're in a multiple offer situation. So that is something you need to discuss with your sellers, whether you want to discuss it at the very beginning when you're first talking about how you're going to handle showings and that kind of thing, or you can wait until you actually get some offers, but you need to get permission from your seller to disclose to the buyers that there are multiple offers. This is actually a NAR code of ethics. The second point, yeah, I will post a link to the video so folks can watch it later, but I don't want to try to do that right now because everyone will be off on their timing. The second thing that's important with multiple offers is you cannot shop offers. You cannot disclose any of the terms of one offer to anyone else. I think everyone already knows this. The video actually talks about the possibility of doing this, but then it says that in some, depending on what the state laws are, and in the state of North Carolina, you cannot tell the terms of one offer unless you get permission from that buyer. And there's really no reason a buyer is going to give you permission to share the terms of their offer. It doesn't provide them with any advantage. If anyone's ever had a situation where they've actually asked a buyer if they could disclose the terms of their offer and the buyer said yes, I'd love to hear about that. You can either bring it up now or you can bring it up later when we have an open discussion about multiple offer situations. Those were the two key takeaways. They also talk about, just being fair to everyone. Once again, I think everyone knows and understands that that is one of the requirements. So sorry, not quite sure how to present this video. I'll have to figure that out for the next time we do this, but that was the key points of the video. Any questions about either of those two? As far as getting permission from your seller to disclose that you're in a multiple offer situation, I would highly recommend you get that in writing. It doesn't necessarily have to be some document you have them sign. It could just, I think an email is sufficient, back and forth, where they acknowledge that, they are giving you permission to share offers if you're in a multiple offer situation. Share that information, not share the details of the offer, of course. Next, I'm going to go over some scenarios that are talked about on this website. I'll post the link after the session so you can go back and look at this. But I wanted to go through 3 of these. There's also a downloadable client brochure that I'm going to show you as well that you can use to discuss with your buyers and your sellers what happens in multiple offer situations. So we'll look at the first one here. Okay, so the existence of multiple offers is a material fact that a listing agent must always disclose. True or false? I accidentally just showed you the answer, but if you didn't see it, give this some thought. The existence of multiple offers is a material fact that a listing agent must always disclose. Well, that's false, because we just discussed you have to get permission from your seller before you can disclose that there are multiple offers. If it was a material fact, you would be required to disclose it. So material facts are facts about the property affecting the property, ability of the broker's principal to complete a transaction. Existence of another offer does not fall into any of these categories. However, in order to maintain a so-called level playing field between competing buyers, if one of the competing buyers is aware of the existence of multiple offer, Real Estate Commission would expect the listing agent to disclose that fact to the other competing buyers. So that's important to understand. If one buyer learns that it's a multiple offer situation, then effectively it does become a material fact, and you do have to disclose that to all of the buyers. So I think everyone probably is aware of that. Okay. Number 2, if asked by a buyer agent if there are other offers, the listing agent is ethically obligated to always disclose the existence of other offers. True or false? Well, once again, I think I accidentally showed the answer, so I'm just going to go ahead and spit it out. That is false. According to the Realtor Code of Ethics, the listing agent must have the seller's approval to disclose the existence of offers on the property. So we're basically talking about the same thing. If the seller doesn't approve, such disclosure would be unethical. On the other hand, if the seller does approve of disclosing the existence of other offers, the listing agent would be ethically required to do so if asked by a buyer agent. Now, if the seller does give you the approval, then you're going to have to say yes if they ask, but you're going to disclose it anyway, so that's sort of irrelevant, but okay. All right. This one I'm going to let y'all try to figure out because I didn't show the answer. If a listing agent discloses to a buyer agent that there are other offers on the property, and the buyer agent asks if the listing agent or another agent in the listing agent firm represents any of the other buyers, the listing agent must answer the question. So you're a listing agent. You've told buyer agents there's multiple offers. One of the buyer agents asks you, hey, are any of those offers coming from you or any other someone else in your firm? You have to answer this question, true or false. So what do y'all think? If anyone wants to chime in and just unmute yourself and say something or just send chat, what's the answer to this one, true or false? Okay, come on, folks. Let's see some chats or speak up. Or someone just chat to let me know you're still hearing me at least. Hello, is anyone there?
Oh,
okay,
yeah.
good.
Yeah, I'm here.
Okay, good. At least I know y'all are there. Okay, now I've seen some chats. Okay, so we've got some trues and we've got a false. Okay, the answer here is actually true. The reason why, there's a couple of reasons. Well, first of all, it's a standard of practice, so it's an ethical. So NAR says it's ethical, you have to do it. So that's the answer. Some of the justifications for that. One is there might be an inherent reason to believe that a firm is going to be more favorable toward their own, other agents. So it's up to, the buyer agent just needs to be aware of this. I think another reason is, especially if it's a variable rate commission, you may have something in the listing agreement that says, hey, if I bring another buyer, I'll reduce your commission. And some firms may have a practice where they allow their firms to say, look, if it's within the firm, even if it's not the same agent, but it's a different agent in the firm, they may reduce the commission. Most firms aren't like Fathom, where we just get a transaction fee. They're getting a split, so they might say, well, look, we're collecting both sides of the commission, so just to make you a little more competitive, we'll let you charge a little less if it's another agent in our firm. So if it's a variable rate commission, you absolutely want to disclose it anyway. That's just common ethics, I think. But according to the NAR standard of practice, you've got to disclose it regardless of whether you think there's an issue there or not. So the answer is true. Okay, is it permissible for a listing agent to disclose a term or term of a buyer's offer to a competing buyer so long as the seller directs the listing agent to do so? We've already talked about this, but I want to make sure y'all are paying attention. So once again, true or false? A seller says, it's fine if you disclose terms of the other offers to the other buyers. Can you do so? Okay, yeah, we talked about that. I'm glad y'all are paying attention. That is false. You have to get permission from the buyer in order to do so. Real Estate Commission Rule 58A-0115. Okay. Now this one is a little difficult. The buyer agent has the right to present an offer directly to the seller unless the seller objects in writing, in which case the buyer agent has a right to a copy of the seller's written instructions. So a buyer agent tells you, hey, I want to present this offer to your seller in writing, or in person, for whatever reason. They just want to make sure it gets to your seller, or maybe they think they can sell it. So the seller has to say, I don't want that. They put it in writing, and you have to provide that to the buyer agent. True or false? Okay, I see some trues. Anyone else want to chime in? Okay, I got it to true. Okay, the answer is true, assuming the property's been listed in MLS. Okay, so there's a NAR rule that says this. It is not a real estate commission rule. So listing agent has an analogous right to present a counteroffer directly to the buyer. So NAR has this in their rules in MLS. So if it's in MLS, the answer is true. If it is not in MLS, as far as I know, there is not a NCREC requirement for this. However, if you get in this situation, I would say check with the Real Estate Commission or check with your BIC, and I may have a chance to look into this after the session. And if I find out differently, I will let you know. As far as I know, this is only a rule if it's in MLS. That's not one that comes up very often. I've rarely seen that happen in our market. And that may be something that if someone wants to bring up during the open forum and just say, yeah, I was in that situation, just let us know how it went. That's really not something that people typically do in this market. In a hot real estate market where there's increased competition for fewer homes, it is a good idea for a buyer to include a letter with his or her offer to distinguish the offer from others. This is what's affectionately known as a love letter. So notice it said it is a good idea. True or false? It's not saying it's forbidden, it's required. Is it a good idea? So Tracy says not a good idea. What do some other folks think? Oops, well, what do some other folks think? So Deanna says yes. Tracy's saying fair housing. Chris, numbers talk. Okay, well, the answer here is false, but notice we're saying good idea. We're not saying you can't. And let's just go over the reasoning that NAR is giving here. It's actually a pretty long answer. Although a buyer letter, or love letter as they're called, can be legal, we think buyers should be discouraged from submitting letters with their offers because they raise concerns with potential violations of fair housing. For example, assume a multiple offer situation involves two buyers with submitting offers containing similar terms. Buyer one was rejected, is of a different national origin than the seller, while successful buyer two shares the same national origin with the seller. Buyer two submitted a letter with her offer that revealed her national origin. Buyer one discovers this fact. They may just point to the letter as some evidence that the seller took buyer two's national origin into account, which of course would be a violation of federal fair housing laws. Now, Deanna's mentioned that had a buyer win one because they did. And I would say that's okay as long as the reason they won it was because of nothing that had to do with federal fair housing. That's the whole can of worms that this can open up. However, as mentioned above, it is not illegal per se for a buyer to submit a letter. And Deanna said no fair housing. I'm sure that you made sure of that. So I know, but you're right. We're going to talk more about this actually. If a buyer insists on including a letter, care should be taken to focus on features that benefits the house itself and avoid specific needs of the buyer or other information that may be related directly or indirectly to a characteristic that is protected under fair housing. Although a carefully drafted buyer letter may be legal, a seller may consider not accepting it in any event to avoid even the appearance that the seller's decision-making may have been influenced by the letter. It's dangerous for a seller to take a letter because the seller may be influenced by something that's fair housing. If a seller wants to tell you ahead of time, I will not accept any buyer letters, they can put that in writing, get it to you. You can refuse them and you can send it to the buyer agent if they try to send you one and say, look, we don't want any buyer letters. Here's something in writing from my seller that says no buyer letters. So if your seller tells you they don't even want to see them, you can refuse them. If your seller wants to see them, you cannot refuse them. You have to give them to your seller. However, you might want to give your seller advice about federal fair housing. Let's go to the next question. And we're going to talk a little bit more about this as well. Assume three buyers have submitted offers on the same property. Offer number one is a lowball offer, but offers 2 and 3 are within the realm of what the seller might consider accepting. Since it's the seller's prerogative to accept, reject, or ignore any offers, it is permissible for the listing agent in this situation to contact the agents representing buyers number 2 and 3 to request that their clients submit their best offers and not respond at all to agent for buyer number 1. You have 3 offers. Your client likes 2 and 3 best, but they're not good enough. They don't even feel like 1 is good enough to even really, they don't want to talk to them. They just say, let's just talk to 2 and 3, ask them to submit their best offer, and you don't even say anything to buyer 1. Is this okay? True or false?
False.
Now, yeah, okay, so false. We got it. Now, Deanna, this is assuming that the seller has given the listing agent permission to do this. So assume that the seller's told the listing agent, yeah, just respond to 2 and 3. Can the listing agent do that?
Yes, that is.
Okay, we've got a yes, we've got some falses. Now Deanna said false.
False.
Okay, we got more falses. Okay, the answer is false. Okay, although the listing agent doesn't have to invite buyer 1 to submit another offer, fairness dictates that the listing agent must at least contact buyer number 1's agent to let him or her know that buyer 1's offer has been rejected. Of course, if buyer 1 submits another offer, the listing agent must present it to the seller. In addition, if the listing agent discloses the existence of multiple offers to the agents for buyers 2 and 3, the listing agent would be obligated to disclose that fact to the agent for buyer 1. So let's go over, there's several things in here going on. First of all, so you get 3 offers. You go back to 2 and 3 and you tell them, hey, we've got multiple offers, can you submit your best offer? And you don't talk at all to 1. Well, you've never even told 1 that you were in a multiple offer situation. So right there, you're in violation because 1 never even knew that you're in a multiple offer situation. So what if you went back to all 3 and you said, well, this is assuming that you haven't gone back to 1 at all since 1 got your offer, but let's just say 1 already knew about the multiple offers. Maybe you'd already had some multiple offers and 1's offer came in after they already knew about multiple offers. And now you start negotiating just with 2 and 3 and you never respond to 1. Well, that's where the fairness comes into. So once again, you need to at least let 1 know, well, we've decided my seller doesn't want to consider your offer. You don't have to tell one that they're still negotiating with 2 and 3. You just tell one, my seller hasn't, declined your offer. Keep in mind, you really should never let buyer agents hang out in the wind anyway. I mean, you need to respond. So fairness dictates that you're going to respond anyway, but in this scenario, you need to make sure you do respond to one and let them know, first of all, that there is a multiple offer situation. And secondly, you just need to let them know my seller declines your buyer's offer. Now, as this says, if they come back with a new offer, you do have to present that to your seller, of course, even if you've already told 2 and 3 that you're just dealing, with them. Okay. Any questions on that, or any other spinoffs on that you would like to discuss? Okay, let's move to the next one. An offer to purchase becomes binding only after this isn't really about multiple offers, but it's a good thing to talk about. An offer to purchase becomes binding only after the party to whom the offer is made signs it without any changes and a signed copy is delivered to the offering party. True or false? So it's not a contract until both have signed and the signed copy is delivered back to the offering party. Okay, we've got a couple. I'm not sure if anyone's answered on this question yet. So is this one true or false? Okay, Deanna says true. False, only notice of acceptance. Okay, so Tracy gave away the answer with her explanation. Yeah, it is false. You only have to communicate back. You don't actually have to deliver it. You are under contract as soon as you communicate back. Assume the offer itself, now unless it's written into the actual offer. So you could write something into an offer that says it's not a contract until I get a copy back that it's signed. Well, let's just read through Deanna will read through this. According to the offer to purchase and contract, the offer becomes binding on the effective date, which is defined in paragraph 1G as the date that the party to whom the offer or counteroffer is made signs or initials it, and such signing or initialing has been communicating to the offering party. Although delivering a signed copy of the accepted offer certainly constitutes communication of acceptance, it's not required by law, which permits communications of acceptance by any usual means of communication, oral or written. For example, a phone call from the listing agent to the buyer agent confirming that the seller has signed the buyer's offer would constitute acceptance. However, very strongly recommend you follow that up with either a text or an email. Always good to have a paper trail. You call the other agent, you tell them, hey, we're under contract. 10 minutes later, that, a better offer comes in, or the buyer agent, their buyer calls them and says, I found a much better home. All of a sudden they have amnesia about that phone call. They just lie and say, she never called me. If you don't have something in writing where you've shown that you've communicated, how are you going to prove you made a phone call? Very strongly recommend, Deanna, yeah, it should be in writing. It doesn't have to be in writing. So I would say, if you want to call them just because you like talking to people, that's great, but follow it up with a text or send it right before you make the phone call. Because, yeah, if you don't have it in writing, you can't prove you actually communicated it. Buyer agent A submits an offer to listing agent B. After presenting the offer to her client, listing agent B emails buyer agent A to say the seller will accept the buyer's offer if the buyer is willing to increase the purchase price by $10,000. After contacting the buyer, buyer agent A replies to listing agent B email stating that the buyer accepts the seller's counteroffer. The property is under contract, true or false? Okay, so we've got some emails flying around. I'm just going to answer this because I don't think y'all need to. That's false. I mean, you've got to have it in the contract. First of all, typically you don't have that authorization. You're not authorized as a real estate agent to bring your client under contract. They have to sign things. Now, if you do have a power of attorney, technically you're still, absent evidence that the buyer held buyer agent A out of possessing authority to bind them to contract, or permitted them to represent them, they do not have any apparent authority to bind the buyer to a contract. So that's basically what that's saying. Note, even if buyer agent A did have actual or apparent authority to bind the buyer to a contract, Facts presented did not indicate that the seller had changed the offer to reflect the increased purchase price and initialed the change. So you still have to have it in a contract. So numbers flying around in an email does not put your client under contract. You do need to have an actual offers and everything signed. If a listing agent in a multiple offer situation advises the buyer agents for the competing buyers in writing that it is a multiple offer situation and advises them to submit their highest and best offers, would it be okay for the seller to accept an offer that does not have the highest price? So I think y'all know the answer to this, but let's just see some answers. So true or false? Someone can just speak up or just send a chat, whatever you want to do. It's okay for a seller to accept an offer that does not have the highest price.
True.
Yeah, that's true, of course. The seller is free to accept any offer they may choose to accept based on consideration of matters other than price. Obviously, the matters cannot be federal fair housing related. However, it's recommended that a listing agent who invites a buyer to submit another offer would simply ask for the buyer's best offer rather than the buyer's highest and best offer. So that's a good point. Most of the time when you see agents sending out these notices, they say send your highest and best offer by X date. This is suggesting that you just ask for the best offer because it doesn't confuse the situation, and it makes it clear that best doesn't necessarily mean highest dollar amount. It might be a much better due diligence fee. It might be a shorter closing date. It might be cash instead of some crazy loan. A rejected buyer who later discovers that the seller sold the property to another buyer for less money than was offered by the rejected buyer may claim, to borrow a famous phrase, that something is rotten in Denmark, and that he should have gotten the property since its offer was highest. So if you just stop talking highest and best, you're not going to condition your seller or your buyer to be thinking only in those terms, but you're going to make it a little more clear. Hey, there are other things that constitute a good offer other than just the price. Okay, so
Craig, may I ask a question about that?
yes.
And I came on late, so I apologize if this was already covered. I've heard it. Some agents have said that calling for highest and best or calling for best offer constitutes a rejection of the offers that are already on the table. Is that true?
No, I don't think that would be true unless you specifically because what you're doing is you're basically saying, hey, I've got your offer. We will consider it at this time, because usually you'll put a deadline, 5 o'clock on Monday. However, you need to be aware we've got multiple offers. So if you'd like to improve your offer and send us a new offer, we'd be more than happy to take it. But you're not rejecting the offer when you do that. You're just basically saying, we got your offer. We're going to wait until 5 o'clock on Monday before we review it. But if you'd like to improve it because you've got competition, you're welcome to do so. So that's all you're doing when you send that out. And you need to make clear when you send it out in an email, you don't say, something like, we got multiple offers, so yours isn't good enough, send a new one. Because yeah, if you said something like that, that would, constitute a rejection. But if you just say, we've got multiple offers, we're going to consider all offers at 5 o'clock tomorrow. You're welcome to send us a new offer with better terms, or else we'll just consider what you've already sent us. So that's basically what you're telling them.
Thank you.
Sure. So a couple of points about that. Now, be sure you are not allowed, and this was actually talked about in the video. You're not allowed to shop offers. Now, what shopping offer means is, hey, I just got an offer and it's for list price. So can anyone better that? You can't do that. You're essentially setting up an auction in that scenario, and unless you have an auctioneer's license, you're not allowed to do that. And I believe even if you have an auctioneer's license, you can't do it unless you set the whole thing up as an auction to begin with. And to be honest with you, I don't know the details of how you would do that, but I know we do have an agent on here who has an auctioneer's license, Clint Brooks. So if you'd like to talk to Clint about becoming an auctioneer, I'm sure he can tell you how to do that. But we're not auctioneers here, so we're not going to be talking about that. But you cannot shop offers. You cannot disclose terms of any of the offers to try to get better terms. The second thing, let's go back to the love letters, because I want to talk a little bit about that. Now, the thing to understand about love letters is the danger there is to the seller and potentially to the listing agent. You know, if a buyer agent wants to say, hey, I'm such and so race and I'm such and so religion and whatever, they're not going to get in trouble with federal fair housing laws. The person that's going to get in trouble is the seller who uses that to influence their decision. So from a buyer's perspective, they can write whatever they want and send it to the seller. That's the seller's the ones at danger. However, there's something called block busting, and that is illegal. So what a buyer can't do is a buyer can't say something like, hey, I noticed that this neighborhood is mostly such and so race. I'm such and so race. If you sell to me, your neighbors will probably be happy because you're closing the door on some other race, you know, moving into the neighborhood. Because there you're using fear and intimidation, you know, to try to convince someone to sell to you because you're like them, you're like the people in that neighborhood. And if they don't sell to you, the neighborhood might become, you know, full of people of another religion or race or whatever fair housing thing that they're violating by doing that. You cannot do that as a buyer. That will get your buyer in big trouble. But if your buyer just says something like, this house would be great for me, you know, the kids could celebrate Christmas in front of that wonderful fireplace, and walk over to the, you know, the Greek grocery store next door because we love, you know, we're Greek or whatever. The buyer's not going to get in trouble for doing that. But if the seller, you know, uses that to skew their decision-making process, they're going to get into trouble. As a buyer agent, you cannot, you know, forbid your buyer from sending a buyer love letter. It's still recommended that you try to avoid that when you can. And if you can't, you know, you can use your judgment on how much you want to tell them, because you just need to make sure they're aware of federal fair housing. But, you know, you don't want to become a lawyer and try to interpret their letter and decide if it's breaking any rules, you know, with, for example, block busting. But just explain to them what that is, if, you know, especially if you read their letter and you think that's what they're doing. And, you know, you can decline to be involved with that letter. If they hand you a letter and you think it's inappropriate, you can say, look, I can't present that letter. If you want to present it, I'll contact the listing agent, and you can take it to the listing agent directly. So you can wash your hands of a letter like that if you think it is block busting. That's something you'd probably want to discuss with your broker in charge if you ever got in that scenario, or even give, you know, your favorite attorney a call. So any questions about any of this stuff that we just went over?
Craig, this is Angela Roll.
Yes.
One of the things that I just ran into, multiple offer situation on a all one level ranch house, which of course appeals to most of the market. The love letter stated that her client was newly confined to a wheelchair because of a degenerative disease. Of course, it was the highest offer, but it was almost like, you know, that love letter, of course, even if it would have been lower, you know, the offer lower than the other offers, definitely would have still swayed my seller into selling to that. Is that, I mean, I think about this all the time going, okay, it really made a difference because of this woman's situation. Are we getting into territory here that's questionable, you know, on affirmative action and discrimination?
Yeah, see, that's one, as a listing agent, I would have had a really talk with my client and say, look, I mean, you're very fortunate that it was the best offer anyway. You know, so, but yeah, that's a really good example of a type of letter you don't want to be getting, because that is something you need to talk to your seller and say, look, you can't use this to make your decision, because that is definitely, you know, federal fair housing is coming into the play. So yeah, that's a scenario where you need to talk to your seller and just say, look, you really need to not, you know, take this letter into account. You need to just look at the numbers. From a buyer agent perspective, I would tell my buyer, look, I can't prevent you from submitting this. You're putting the seller in a tough position, but if you're okay with that, you know, it's real, like I said before, it's really, the risk is to the seller. as a buyer agent, as long as you inform your buyer that, hey, this is dicey, you're putting the seller in a really tough situation, you might be enticing them to, break federal fair housing laws, I would send something to them in writing, because if this came before the real estate commission or before an ethical board, you want to make sure that it doesn't look like you sort of convinced your buyer to do this to give them an advantage. So you need to be clear. I would have something in writing to your buyer that says, just be aware of what you're doing here. I don't advise it, but if you want me to present this letter, I'm compelled to do so, and I will do so. But yeah, that's an example where you want to try to prevent that from happening where you can. So any other questions about what we've discussed? I'm going to show you one other thing, and then we're just going to sort of open it up to anyone that wants to talk about a scenario they were in, or just some of their best practices for multiple offers. Let's go back to, let's see, where is it? I think I have it in this email. Yeah, this was actually the word. Let's go through this again. I forgot if there's a little bit in here that we might not have covered. Okay, well, this is just talking about buyer letters and do they constitute federal fair housing. So I think we went over all this, and here's where it talks about block busting. Make sure your buyer letter did not indicate or hint to the seller that he or she did not sell you the house, that other undesirable persons might move into the neighborhood. You also need to be aware that even if you and your client have done nothing wrong, a buyer letter could jeopardize the transaction. So, if the Department of HUD received a complaint from another buyer about your buyer letter, HUD could stop your transaction immediately and investigate. So there's something interesting to think about. You do a buyer letter, it's a perfectly good buyer letter, but somehow one of the other buyers finds out about it, they complain, even if though it's a perfectly good buyer letter, HUD might stop your transaction while they investigate. And who knows how long that might take. So that's something to think about when you get to buyer letters. So let's go back to my email here. Okay, handling, yeah, we went through that. Okay, I've got it in here. Let me pull this up. Okay, this is, and I'll provide y'all with a link. This is a guide to multiple offers. There's a PDF and there's a doc. So you can use the Word document to actually put in, in North Carolina Association of Realtors. Now this thing's really old, 2005, but this is just some general information that you can use to review with your buyers and with your sellers to talk about multiple offers. I'm not going to go through all the details, but it's something you might want to read, and it might be something you present and use as how you go through this with your buyer or with your seller. Now read through here. If there's anything in here you feel like is out of date, you can take it out, because like I said, there is a Word version. If you have any questions about anything here, maybe bring it up with your broker in charge, with your district director later after you've read through it. But I will make this the link available for y'all, so you can use this as a tool to help discuss with your buyers and your sellers. Okay, so that was the basic prepared material that I had to talk about this. I think some of the main takeaways, and we'll talk about some specific scenarios if y'all have any. Some of the main takeaways is you have to be fair. Everyone needs to know if there is a multiple offer situation. If you tell one person, you got to tell them all. You have to get permission from your seller before you disclose that there are multiple offers. So you can go over strategies for how to deal with those and talk to your seller about whether they want to deal with that. Or some sellers, they don't want to have to deal with people haggling. They just want to get the offers and make a decision. I've had that before, and that's fine. If they don't want to disclose it, they just want to collect the offers and make a decision, that's their right to do so. You can't force them into doing one thing or the other. You just have to make sure if you do multiple offers and you notify the parties that you're doing it correctly. So who's had a recent multiple offer scenario that you feel like went well for you or went bad for you, and you just want to talk about like a best practice or what you did? I don't have one personally, so I'm sort of counting on somebody to bring one up. Who's got something you'd like to talk about?
Hey, Craig, I have a question.
Sure.
Is there any kind of deadline on how many days you can accept offers for? Say, for instance, one of my mentees, they submitted an offer on a Monday, and the listing agent came back and said that they're going to be accepting offers until the following Sunday. So, is there any kind of rule that kind of says that they can only do that for so long, or can they accept offers for a month? I mean, if they wanted to, what's the rule on that?
Yeah, so there's no deadline. Basically, the rule, there's two things that can apply. One is if you want to, you can ask a listing agent, hey, you need to let me know in writing if you have actually presented my offer to your seller. And then the listing agent has 24 hours to reply back to you to let you know that they have presented the offer to the seller. So what the listing agent can't do is they can't just hold all of the offers until next Sunday and then present them to the seller. They have to, now by presenting it, they can just send it, they can email it. And if the seller just wants to ignore it and say, look, we're not even gonna look at any of them until next Sunday, they can do that. But the listing agent, you cannot hold on to the offer. You have to send it to the seller. But if, especially if the buyer sends you this, the buyer agent sends you this demand letter, then you have to send it to your seller, but the seller doesn't have to open the email, and you don't have to discuss it with the seller at all until the seller's ready. Now, of course, as a buyer, if they don't want to wait till next Sunday, you can put a deadline in the additional provisions addendum that says, hey, this offer expires, Tuesday or whatever. And that scenario, now the seller, if they want to wait till Sunday, then your offer is going to expire, and it's up to your buyer to decide if they want to, basically remove that deadline or just resubmit the offer or whatever they want to do. So no, there is no deadline for a seller to wait before they respond to an offer. And if the buyer doesn't like that, they can set their own deadline and either deal with it or not. I mean, so yeah, so that's the answer. So does that answer your question?
Yes, sir, it does. I wish that they would make some kind of guidelines for this kind of situation, because we're seeing more and more of this. It would be better if the Realtor Association or North Carolina Association or a commission would make some sort of guidelines, because it's getting a little out of hand.
Well, I don't know how this applies right now, but I know earlier on during the pandemic, there was an issue with people getting into homes because, there were limits to, you couldn't have more than one person. You really, I mean, honestly, you shouldn't have multiple people in a home right now anyway, although I know that's not happening, but it was a little bit difficult to get into homes. So people were sort of expanding the time before they'd wait to respond to offers to make sure they had enough people in the home to, to get some good offers. That's up to the seller and the listing agent right now. I don't know if there's any legal things that would prevent any sort of deadline like that from being enforced. Like I said, the only legal thing right now is that the listing agent does have to respond within 24 hours if the buyer agent asks for proof in writing or a statement in writing that the listing agent has sent the offer to the seller. Beyond that, there's nothing there right now. And you're always welcome to provide feedback to North Carolina Association of Realtors or feedback to the Real Estate Commission on things that you think need changing. So you could send an email, provide feedback that says here's the problem, I think you guys need to fix it, and they might respond.
Thank you.
Sure. What are some other scenarios that y'all been in with multiple offers that you'd like to bring up?
Craig, I have something I'd like to ask about the multiple offers. If a seller has given their agent permission to disclose multiple offers to agents, which agents would you need to disclose to, let's say, every agent who showed the property, or every agent who said they would be sending an offer or has sent an offer, or just, can you tell me more about that?
Yeah. Right. I understand the question. So legally, you're just required to let anyone that's submitted an offer know that there are multiple offers. Okay, so what that means then is if you're still got the multiple offers and now you get a new offer, the first thing you got to do is you got to go back to that person and say, hey, thank you for your offer, but guess what? We're in a multiple offer situation, and we'll take this offer, but if you'd like to send us a new offer knowing that scenario, here's the deadline. Now, the problem there would be, of course, if they send it to you at 4:45 and you tell them the deadline's 5 o'clock, then they're going to feel a little slighted there. That's sort of up to your seller. Your seller might be wise just once you're in a multiple offer situation, just to let everyone know. You can just, you can even put it. I'm not 100% sure if that's something that I'd have to look to see if MLS has an issue with you putting those comments in the agent remarks section. I think they may not allow that, but you could, maybe just send it out a notice to everyone that showed the property at least at a minimum.
Okay, so that is how I've handled it before, is I've just gone in through showing time and sent a notice to everyone who showed it what our deadline is and that there are multiple offers. And that was the other part of my question, is there a guideline for how agents need to be notified, or is anything?
No, there's no specific guideline on how to notify them. Personally, I've done it just the way you just mentioned before. It's like, once again, you need to just talk to your seller. They may have a different strategy. They may feel like a different approach is better. You just have to make sure you follow the rules. Anyone that has submitted an offer needs to know that it's a multiple offer situation. Now, also keep in mind what that means is you've got one offer on the table, and then maybe you get a second offer. You need to make sure, if you tell either party that there's an offer, that it's multiple offers, you have to tell both parties. So you might start off not in a multiple offer situation, but while you're considering offer A, you get an offer from B, and you've told B that you've already got an offer from A. Now you got to go back and tell A, hey, guess what? I've got a new offer from B. So keep that in mind as well. Has anyone ever been in a multiple offer situation where you've maybe your seller or you've decided, we're not going to tell the world, we're just going to tell the people that have submitted the offers? Or do you always tell the world? Does anyone have a strategy you'd like to talk about as far as that goes? Okay, well, I guess not. No. So what else? Any other situations you want to discuss? Anyone have any questions or any general practices for how you've handled multiple offers? How maybe a strategy for what the deadline you want to set? How much time you give people? Do you even want to set a deadline? You don't have to set a deadline. You can tell folks, hey, we're in a multiple offer situation. If you want to send us a new, your best offer, feel free to do so. But my seller hasn't decided how long they're willing to wait. They may make a decision in the next, in another hour. You don't necessarily have to set a deadline. You just have to notify there's multiple offers. Has anyone got any comments on how they've had something that's worked good for them or not worked good for them in those regards?
Hey, Craig, this is Kim Monk.
Yeah.
I recently had my last listing. We had 24 showings in a day and we had 12 offers. And we had this situation. My sellers did not want to announce a deadline. They did decide that they wanted to review that night, and then I could tell everyone that, but they didn't want to say a certain time. They didn't want to say it that they wouldn't take offers through the night because they had showings also on the next day as well. They wanted to even leave those open. I had several agents very irritated with me because of that, obviously.
Right.
But they ended up, I just made a spreadsheet and I sent them to them all day long. And we went through the spreadsheet. And even while we were going through the spreadsheet, I had phone calls coming in with people giving me verbal offers. In that situation, obviously I have to give them all the offers. At what point can I help my sellers understand that it's not a very a wise thing to do to make everyone irritated like that, or just let it go? Do you have any advice on it, advising sellers a little bit better?
Yeah, I mean, that's a good problem to have, all those offers. So a couple of things. First of all, the verbal offers, keep in mind, verbal offer is not an offer. I mean, it's, it's not, so legally, you don't have to share that information with your seller. Hey, I just got a verbal offer for X. Although I would recommend you do so, because you should provide your seller with all the information that might be pertinent to their decision making. And knowing that there's a verbal offer that could turn into a real offer, especially if it's a really good one, that might be valuable
Correct.
information for them to have. And you wouldn't want them to find out later that there was some verbal offer that you never told them about that was for a whole lot more. I would just explain to them, look, just let them understand that they don't have to set a deadline. They don't have to, ask for best, send us your best offer by X time, but it sort of helps, the process. And, if they don't set some sort of deadline, they might get to it might make it difficult for them to make a decision, because they're like, when do we stop this process? You always feel like there might be a better, there might be a better offer coming tomorrow. So, so if you sort of set yourself a deadline, you're sort of forcing yourself to make a decision, and, and also make sure they understand that any of those offers they have that they're considering can be withdrawn at any time, right? So they may have this great offer and they're waiting for the next offer, which might be better. And then the person that they made this offer has changed their mind or found a better home and got tired of waiting, and they withdraw that offer. So you need to make sure they understand that, because that's important for them to know that this offer, even if there's no deadline that was put in an additional provisions addendum, that buyer can still withdraw that offer at any time. So if your seller understands that, and then say, I would just try to give them advice that it's probably better to set a deadline, and also let them understand that you set a deadline at 5 o'clock tomorrow and you change your mind in the morning and just say, look, I just want this to end. You can go ahead and accept an offer before 5 o'clock. So setting a 5 o'clock deadline does not mean that your seller has to wait until 5 o'clock. Now, yeah, you're gonna have a lot of angry agents on the other end, because, right. But, tough. There's no law that says they have to honor the deadline. They can, and they don't have to decide at 5 o'clock. If they get at 5 o'clock comes, they review the offers, they're still not happy, they don't have to accept an offer at 5 o'clock. Once again, you have a lot of mad buyer agents, but but I would, just give them the best advice possible there, and try to help them, come to a decision, and not just, spin their wheels and never decide, because that it can be difficult. It's, that falling into that trap of, well, this is good, but it might be better if I, wait another day or whatever. And that's right. A lot of offers. I mean,
yeah, and I think that the spreadsheet helped them see it on paper, what the differences were in the offers, what was the positive features of each offer, and then that way it was easier for them to narrow it down to the top, one or two.
Yeah, absolutely. And I would just put buyer A, buyer B, buyer C instead of actual names on that spreadsheet, because that way you help prevent any sort of federal housing issues from coming up regarding, like nationality. And that's a good way to, to help prevent that. And, if so, just the facts, the numbers and the dates is all you need.
Okay.
And the loan information, that kind of thing. It looks like there's a chat. Let me check on that. No, that's nothing. Okay, so anyone got anything else? Other scenarios you'd like to talk about? Best practices? Then most of y'all who have, I'm sorry, go ahead.
One of the things that I've been running into multiple offers is buyers that are representing they're bringing cash, and then they go under contract, and lo and behold, they get a loan.
Yeah.
Does anybody have any, I mean, is there any kind of, any way that we can protect our sellers from that kind of activity? Because it definitely changes, if they would have known that particular buyer was going to be using a loan versus cash, I think it would have changed decision making. There's so many nuances out there for and strategies for people trying to win offers right now, win contracts.
So I would make a few comments on that. First of all, as a buyer's agent, if you know that this is what your seller is planning on doing, or your buyer is planning on doing, that would be an ethics violation, and you don't want to be involved in that kind of a little scenario. Now, if your buyer lied to you and they are the ones up to this, then you would have no way of knowing as a buyer agent. As a listing agent, I would say if you're getting a cash offer, you know, make sure it looks right. I mean, in other words, there's not a 2-month closing period. It should be a pretty quick close. You know, have as short a due diligence period as you can negotiate. You're not worrying about the home appraising. You know, so you don't have to have it out further, you know, because what if the home doesn't appraise? Try to get the due diligence fees as high as you can. I mean, you know, the buyer can back out for any or no reason before that due diligence period. So if they change their mind and they decide to get a loan and the loan falls through and they have to back out, well, I mean, they could have backed out even if they were getting cash before that due diligence period. So technically there's, you know, I guess you'd have to talk to an attorney. The contract, it says, you know, when it talks about a loan or cash, it uses the word intends. So how do you prove that the buyer really intended to get cash when they submitted that offer, when they said they intended to get a loan? I have no idea. That's what an attorney would have to give you some advice. If somehow you could dig up something in writing that showed that the buyer was planning to do this all along, then yeah, the buyer would have, you know, that's fraud, I would think. And, you know, an attorney could talk to you about what remedies your seller might have in that scenario. But, you know, I would think that's gonna be something that's pretty hard to prove, that, you know, if the buyer says they intended to pay cash, but then after they went into contract, they figured out, oh, dang, I'm gonna have to spend $10,000 for a new HVAC and, you know, blah, blah, blah. So now all of a sudden I don't have enough cash and I need to get a loan, or whatever their reason is for changing it to a loan. I mean, yeah, you're probably going to figure that they did it just to try to, you know, trick you in so they could get the house, but how do you prove that? So I would just say try to get as high due diligence period, highest due diligence fee as you can get, short due diligence period, short closing period, all the stuff you would expect from a cash sale, and you know, just protect your seller as best you can that way. Anyone else have any other ideas about that? Okay, does that help?
Yes, thank you.
Okay. Anyone else? Any other scenarios you've been in with multiple offers, or any other strategies that you use either from the buyer side or from the seller side? You know, from one thing that I always have trouble with buyers is they ask me, well, how much do I need to offer to get this home? You know, I mean, you can tell them based on your experience, you know, hey, this house is going to get multiple offers and, you know, list price isn't good enough. But, you know, it's hard to know. I always tell them, you know, the higher you make your offer and the better your deposits are and the shorter your dates are, the better chance you have getting the home. But there's really no silver bullet. Does anyone have any strategies like that, how you advise your buyers on what sort of offer they need to make when you know it's going to be in a multiple offer situation? Anyone have any useful tidbits they'd like to share with the group?
Craig, I just tell my folks, I tell them, hey guys, you know, you need to offer what you're comfortable with offering, but keep in mind that the home actually has to appraise, because if it don't appraise, you know, you're taking a chance on losing your due diligence money. Also make your offer as clean as possible. Don't go in asking for, you know, all of the appliances and $10,000 in closing costs. You know, you're competing with all these other people. So you really need to make your offer as clean as possible that you're comfortable with and that you can afford. And always keep in mind that the home has to appraise. And if you back out because the home does not appraise or for whatever reason, the seller doesn't have to renegotiate and you could possibly lose your due diligence money. I think that's one thing with these new agents, especially, is they're not, you know, understanding that, you know, the appraisal comes into factor. And yeah, a buyer may go in and go over, you know, on an asking price $10,000, and then they're going to have to bring the difference to the table, then their down payment, and then their closing costs. There's a lot more money there than what I think they're actually thinking of. So they need to take in consideration the appraisal, and the seller does not have to negotiate that. Another thing too, I noticed that with my folks, when I submit an offer to another agent, I try to do like a summary sheet with it. I summarize, the price. I summarize all the key points of the offer. That way, the agent has it right in front of them, and it makes, it easier for the seller agents to read. So it really, really helps out, that they see that and they thank me for that, because it makes it really a lot easier for them to work.
Yeah, those are some very good points, Dan. And I do that too. When I send an offer, I always like to highlight, here's here are the basic facts of the offer, and maybe lead off with the strongest point, just to draw attention to that. And I wanted to also comment on what you said about the appraisal. So that's a really good point, because I know sometimes you'll see a buyer that'll, they'll want to have some sort of addendum that says, if the home doesn't appraise, buyer will bring the difference to the closing table. And that's perfectly okay, as long as you remember you're not an attorney. You can't write that. You need to get an attorney to draft that. It is permissible for the buyer to draft it, or potentially for a seller to draft something like that. Really don't advise to have your clients drafting stuff like that unless they happen to be an attorney, because they're just going to, if they screw it up, it's going to hurt them. And if they provide the writing and the buyer signs it, and then it ends up something unfair to the buyer might go after them. You really want to get an attorney to draft something like that. So if you want to use some kind of addendum that says, hey, if the home doesn't appraise, the buyer will bring whatever money they need to bring to the closing to make the deal work, and they're not going to ask for the price to be lowered or whatever. Get an attorney to draft that for you, so that you don't get yourself or your buyer into trouble. Or if a seller wants to make that, hey, look, I want that to be a term of any contract I accept. You may want to present that to all the buyers agents that are submitting offers. Get an attorney to draft it and say, look, when you submit your offer, get your buyer to sign this. You can do that as a seller, as a listing agent, but just make sure it's drafted by an attorney if you want to do something like that. Obviously, appraisals can be a big problem when you get multiple offer situations, because that bidding war starts and the price goes way above the list price. And you may have already priced it pretty aggressively to begin with. And if it doesn't appraise, that can cause, that'll cause issues unless, the buyer's got the money to bring to closing. Anyone else have anything you want to bring up, ask about, scenario you've been in? Any buyer love letter fun times you've had? I really hate those. I try to, if my buyer asks you to send a letter, I say, well, it's not usually a good idea, but if you do it, just, stick to things that aren't related to, I talk about fair housing. And, sometimes if they go through a house and they see that the person shares a hobby with them, that's a good thing they can talk about, things like that. But, you want to stay away from all the federal fair housing stuff. So any other comments or questions? I will post some of these links on the Facebook page, so y'all can go back and look. You can also find this if you go to ncrealtor.org, or if you go to NAR and just search on multiple offers, you can find a lot of this information there as well. This email that I referred to came out on October 6th. So you should have gotten that email. So if you go back and look at your email on October 6th, you can probably find this email as well with all the links in it. So if anyone else, no more questions, we'll conclude. I got one more chat. Let me check on that. Let me hold on. Let me go to the bottom here. Okay, there was a question that came in a while back and I missed it, so I'll answer that. Can an agent lie about having multiple offers or another offer? Absolutely not. Agents are not allowed to lie at any time. That is a violation of the realtor ethics, and you're also going to get yourself in trouble with the Real Estate Commission if you start lying, and you might get yourself sued. So if you've been in a scenario where you feel like the other agent lied, the problem is, how do you prove it? But if an agent is lying, you cannot, if your seller directs you to lie, you can't lie. That is one, or your buyer. That's one of the times when you don't have to do what your buyer or your seller tells you to do. If they cannot ask you or tell you to lie. So you can't say you've got multiple offers. Sometimes you'll get an agent and you'll ask them, well, do you have any other interest? And they'll say, well, the proper answer there, if you don't have an actual offer, would be, well, maybe you've had an agent tell you they're planning to send you an offer. You can say that, but you need to be clear you don't have that offer actually received yet. So that's not a multiple offer situation until they actually get that offer. But if you're truthful and you tell someone, hey, yes, I've received word from another agent that they're planning to write up an offer, that's okay. You can use vague terms like, yeah, the property's been getting a lot of interest. Now, if you've got no phone calls on the property and it's had one showing in 2 weeks, you're lying. So, obviously there's going to be a gray area there. What is a lot of interest, and, over what time period? Just you got to use your gut on that one. Just be careful there. You don't want to, say something that could be interpreted as lying. But stick to the facts. And yeah, if you do not have multiple offers, you cannot lie and say you do. Okay, any other questions for anyone? Okay, well, thank you everyone for attending. I hope y'all all have a great day.
Thank you.
All right, see y'all everyone. Goodbye.
Thanks.